Restaurant refuses to serve black family. 5 minutes later, they own the restaurant. Imagine walking into an upscale restaurant on your wedding anniversary, dressed in your finest attire, only to be humiliated and turned away because of who you are. Now picture this. Within hours, the very same establishment that rejected you becomes yours to own and transform. How did a night of discrimination turn into an unexpected opportunity that would change not just one family's life, but an entire community? Let's stick around to find out. But before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from today. If you enjoy this tale, don't forget to subscribe. The elegant doors of Le Maison Dorée swung open silently as James Carter held them for his wife Evelyn and their 2 children, Michael and Sarah. The family was dressed impeccably for what was meant to be a special celebration, their 15th wedding anniversary. James cut a striking figure in his carefully tailored charcoal suit, while Evelyn's emerald dress caught the warm ambient lighting of the upscale restaurant, sending subtle sparkles dancing across the walls. "Daddy, this place is fancy," Sarah whispered excitedly, her eyes wide as she took in the crystal chandeliers and pristine white tablecloths. Michael, trying to appear more sophisticated at 12 years old, simply nodded in agreement, though his expression betrayed equal wonder. The restaurant hummed with quiet conversation and the gentle clink of fine china. Classical music played softly in the background, creating an atmosphere of refined elegance. Several tables sat empty, their surfaces gleaming beneath carefully arranged place settings, while other diners enjoyed their meals in the intimate lighting. James approached the hostess stand, his posture confident but approachable. "Good evening," he said warmly. "Reservation for Carter, party of 4. The young hostess glanced down at her tablet, her expression shifting almost imperceptibly. Her eyes darted to the side, seeking out someone in particular. Within moments, a tall man in an immaculate suit approached, his sharp features set in what might have been intended as a smile, but came across more as a grimace. "Good evening," the man said, his tone clipped and formal. "I'm Greg Whitman, the manager. I'm afraid there seems to be some confusion with your reservation." James maintained his composure, though he felt Evelyn tense slightly beside him. "There must be some mistake," he replied evenly. "I confirmed the reservation myself this morning. As you can see, there are several empty tables available." Greg's smile tightened, his eyes conducting a deliberate sweep of the Carter family before returning to James. "I assure you, sir, we are fully committed this evening. Perhaps." He paused, his voice taking on a condescending edge. "Another establishment might better suit your preferences." The implication hung heavy in the air. Evelyn's hand found James's, squeezing it gently. The children shifted uncomfortably, picking up on the tension though not fully understanding its source. "I see," James said, his voice remaining steady despite the humiliation burning in his chest. "Thank you for your time." He turned to his family, maintaining his dignity. "Let's go, everyone. We'll find somewhere else to celebrate." As they turned to leave, Evelyn whispered, "James, he can't just—" "Not now, Evie," James murmured back, his jaw tight. "Not in front of the kids." From a corner table, an older gentleman in an expensive suit watched the scene unfold, his expression darkening with each passing moment. As the Carters reached the door, his voice cut through the restaurant's ambient noise. "Excuse me," he called out, his tone carrying an unmistakable authority. "Would you mind waiting a moment?" The Carters paused, turning to face the man who was now rising from his seat. He was tall, with distinguished silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. He approached them with measured steps, buttoning his jacket as he moved. "I couldn't help but overhear," he said, his voice warm but carrying an edge of steel. "I'm William Patterson. I'd very much appreciate it if you'd allow me to address this situation." Greg Whitman had followed, his previous confidence wavering slightly. "Mr. Patterson, I assure you this is simply a matter of capacity." "Is it?" Patterson cut him off sharply. "Because I've been sitting here for the past hour, watching at least 4 tables remain empty. Would you care to explain that?" The restaurant had grown quiet, other diners now watching the scene with poorly concealed interest. Greg's face flushed red, but before he could respond, Patterson continued. "Or perhaps you'd like to explain why I've witnessed 3 other parties seated without reservation in the time I've been here, none of whom faced the scrutiny you've applied to the Carters." James stepped forward, ever diplomatic. "Mr. Patterson, we appreciate your concern, but we don't want to cause any trouble." Patterson's expression softened as he turned to James. "You're not the one causing trouble, Mr. Carter. In fact—" He paused, turning back to face Greg with a steel in his gaze that made the manager take an involuntary step back. "As the owner of La Maison Dorée, I find myself deeply troubled by what I've just witnessed." The revelation landed like a thunderclap in the quiet restaurant. Greg's face drained of color, while several staff members exchanged knowing looks. Patterson's ownership of the restaurant had been carefully guarded information, making his public intervention all the more significant. "Owner?" Greg stammered, his composure cracking. "But I thought—" "You thought wrong," Patterson interrupted. "And now, I think it's time we had a serious discussion about the future of this establishment." He turned back to the Carters, his stern expression melting into a genuine smile. "But first, I insist you join me for dinner. The best table in the house just happened to become available." The first act ends with the Carters being led to a prime table, while Greg Whitman stands frozen, watching his carefully constructed world begin to crumble. Patterson's revelation has set in motion a chain of events that would transform not just one family's evening, but the entire future of La Maison Dorée. The crystal glasses clinked softly as Emily Parker, known to most as Samantha, carefully arranged place settings at the Carters' table. Her hands trembled slightly, but her smile remained genuine as she worked. Unlike Greg's manufactured politeness, her warmth was authentic, though tinged with an undercurrent of nervous energy. "Welcome to La Maison Dorée," she said, her voice steady despite the tension still lingering in the air. "I'll be taking care of you this evening. May I start you with some sparkling water while you look over the menus?" Mr. Patterson, who had joined the Carters at their table, nodded approvingly at Emily's professionalism. "Thank you, Emily. And please, bring us a bottle of the 82 Bordeaux. We're celebrating an anniversary tonight, after all." Through the kitchen's swinging doors, the staff watched the scene unfold with mixed emotions. Chef Tony Romano wiped his brow with his sleeve, exchanging meaningful glances with his line cooks. They had all witnessed Greg's discriminatory behavior before, but never had anyone of Mr. Patterson's stature stepped in to address it. "Back to work," Tony called out, though his voice lacked its usual sharp edge. "But keep your ears open. Something's about to change around here." Meanwhile, Mr. Patterson excused himself from the Carters' table, his expression hardening as he made his way toward the kitchen. "Greg," he called out, his voice carrying an unmistakable command. "My office. Now." The kitchen fell silent as Greg followed Patterson through the back corridor. The door to the small office barely closed before Patterson's voice, though controlled, carried through the walls. "How long?" Patterson demanded. "How long have you been turning away guests based on your personal prejudices?" Greg's response was barely audible, but Patterson's next words rang clear. "Don't insult my intelligence. I've been watching this restaurant for months, receiving reports, gathering evidence. Tonight was simply the final confirmation I needed." In the dining room, Emily continued serving the Carters with exceptional care, her previous nervousness replaced with quiet determination. She had witnessed too many similar incidents under Greg's management, always feeling powerless to intervene. Tonight felt different. "Your appetizers will be out shortly," she assured them, then hesitated before adding, "And I want you to know that not everyone here shares Greg's perspectives. Many of us have wanted to speak up, but—" Evelyn reached out, patting Emily's hand gently. "We understand, dear. Thank you." The kitchen doors burst open as Greg stormed out, his face ashen. He headed straight for the exit, not making eye contact with anyone. Mr. Patterson emerged moments later, addressing the staff who had gathered in the kitchen. "As of this moment, Greg Whitman is no longer employed by Le Maison Doré," he announced. The relief that swept through the kitchen was palpable. Several staff members exchanged quiet high fives, while others simply nodded in satisfaction. Patterson continued, "This establishment was founded on principles of excellence, not exclusion. What happened tonight has opened my eyes to changes that need to be made. Starting now." Returning to the Carters' table, Patterson found them enjoying their appetizers, the children's earlier tension replaced with excitement over the elegant presentations. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter," Patterson began, settling into his chair, "I owe you an apology for what happened earlier, but I'd also like to thank you." James looked up, surprised. "Thank us?" "Yes." Patterson leaned forward, his eyes bright with purpose. "I'm offering you ownership of Le Maison Doré. No purchase necessary. Consider it an investment in the future of this establishment." The silence that followed was profound. Evelyn's fork clattered against her plate, while James seemed to have forgotten how to breathe. "But we don't have any restaurant experience," Evelyn finally managed. Patterson smiled. "You have something more valuable: integrity, dignity, and the ability to handle difficult situations with grace. The technical aspects can be learned. Character, however, is inherent." "This is overwhelming," James said, still struggling to process the offer. "The financial implications alone—" "As I said, no purchase necessary," Patterson interrupted. "I've made my fortune. Now I want to ensure my legacy. The staff here is excellent. They just needed proper leadership. What do you say?" The children, who had been listening with wide eyes, could barely contain their excitement. "Mom, Dad, you have to say yes," Sarah whispered loudly. James and Evelyn looked at each other, years of shared dreams and struggles passing between them in a single glance. Finally, James turned back to Patterson. "We need time to learn, to understand the business." Patterson's smile widened. "Of course. I'll stay on as an advisor for as long as needed." The second act closes with the Carters tentatively accepting Patterson's offer, unaware that their lives, and the future of Le Maison Doré, were about to change in ways they could never have imagined. In the kitchen, the staff continued their work with renewed energy, hope replacing fear as the primary emotion driving their efforts. A new chapter was beginning, not just for the Carters, but for everyone connected to this elegant establishment. The morning sun streamed through Le Maison Doré's windows as James and Evelyn Carter stood before their assembled staff. 2 weeks had passed since that fateful night, and the paperwork making them the new owners was finally complete. The anxiety in the room was palpable. Change, even positive change, often bred uncertainty. "Good morning, everyone," James began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "First, we want to thank you all for your patience during this transition. We know change can be uncomfortable, but we're here to build something special together." Chef Tony Romano stood at the back of the group, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. As head chef for the past decade, he had the most to lose if things went wrong. The Carters knew winning his trust would be crucial. Evelyn stepped forward, addressing the staff's unspoken concerns. "We're not here to revolutionize everything overnight. We respect the tradition and excellence that already exists here. But we do want to create an environment where everyone can thrive and contribute their best. As the meeting progressed, the tension began to ease. The Carters outlined their initial plans: extended kitchen hours to reduce staff stress, a revised reservation system, and most importantly, an open-door policy for suggestions and concerns. After the meeting, Chef Tony approached them. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter," he began formally, "I'd like to show you something in the kitchen." They followed him through the swinging doors, where he pulled out a worn leather-bound notebook. "These are recipes I've been developing for years," he explained, his professional facade cracking slightly to reveal passion underneath. "Greg never wanted to hear about them, said they weren't sophisticated enough for our clientele." The Carters spent the next hour reviewing Tony's creations, innovative fusion dishes that respected French tradition while incorporating diverse cultural influences. It was their first glimpse of the hidden talents their staff had been forced to suppress. However, the honeymoon period was short-lived. 3 weeks into their ownership, disaster struck during a packed Saturday service. 2 line cooks called in sick, and the kitchen was quickly overwhelmed with orders. "We're drowning out here," Tony called out, sweat beading on his forehead as tickets piled up. Without hesitation, James rolled up his sleeves and stepped into the kitchen. "What can I do?" he asked. Tony looked skeptical but desperate enough to accept help. "You know how to prep vegetables?" "I'm a quick learner." What followed was a crash course in kitchen operations. James's corporate efficiency combined with Tony's culinary expertise created an unexpected synergy. Meanwhile, Evelyn discovered that Emily, their waitress, had a background in systems management and could help streamline their service flow. More surprises emerged as the staff began opening up. The quiet dishwasher, Miguel, turned out to be a talented pastry chef who had trained in Paris. The bartender, Sarah, had a degree in marketing and social media management. As the Carters encouraged their employees to share their skills, La Maison Dorée began to transform. Tony worked with Miguel to develop a new dessert menu, while Sarah began promoting the restaurant's evolution on social media. Emily's systems knowledge helped them implement a more efficient reservation and seating system. The menu gradually expanded, incorporating Tony's fusion creations alongside traditional French dishes. The restaurant's reputation grew, attracting a more diverse clientele while maintaining its standards of excellence. One evening, as the kitchen hummed with well-orchestrated activity, Tony pulled James aside. "You know," he said, wiping his hands on his apron, "I was wrong about you both. I thought this place would lose its soul under new ownership. Instead, you've helped us find it." The transformation wasn't just professional, it was cultural. Staff members began sharing meals together before service, exchanging stories and ideas. The rigid hierarchy that had existed under Greg's management gave way to a more collaborative environment. Local food critics took notice. La Maison Dorée received glowing reviews not just for its food, but for its atmosphere of inclusive excellence. Regular customers commented on the positive energy that seemed to emanate from every corner of the restaurant. 3 months into their ownership, the Carters hosted a special community dinner, offering a tasting menu that showcased both traditional French cuisine and Tony's fusion creations. The event sold out within hours of being announced. As they watched their diverse crowd of guests enjoying the evening, Evelyn squeezed James's hand. "Remember when we thought we weren't qualified to run a restaurant?" James chuckled. "Turns out we weren't running it. We were just letting it become what it was always meant to be." The third act closes with La Maison Dorée buzzing with energy and purpose. The staff moved with confidence, their hidden talents now fully expressed and appreciated. What had begun as a crisis of leadership had transformed into a renaissance of creativity and community. The restaurant had become more than just a business. It was a testament to what could happen when people were given the freedom to bring their whole selves to their work. In the kitchen, Tony was teaching James the secret to his signature sauce, while Miguel put the finishing touches on a spectacular new dessert creation. Through the windows, the setting sun cast a golden glow across the dining room, where Evelyn was greeting guests with the warmth and grace that had become the restaurant's new trademark. The transformation was well underway, but the best was yet to come. 6 months after the Carters took ownership of La Maison Dorée, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway during the quiet afternoon lull between lunch and dinner service. Greg Whitman stood hesitantly at the entrance, noticeably different from the proud manager he'd been half a year ago. His expensive suit was replaced by casual business attire, and his once rigid posture carried a hint of humility. Emily, who was arranging place settings, froze momentarily before approaching him. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice neutral but guarded. I'd like to speak with the Carters, if possible," Greg replied softly. "I understand if they don't want to see me." James emerged from the office, stopping short when he saw Greg. The two men locked eyes across the restaurant, years of history and hurt hanging in the air between them. "Mr. Carter," Greg began, "I know I have no right to be here, but—" "Join me for coffee," James interrupted, gesturing to a corner table. As they sat, Greg took in the changes to the restaurant. The walls, once stark and formal, now displayed local artwork. The atmosphere was warmer, more inviting, yet still maintained its elegance. "The place looks different," Greg observed. "Better." "It's not just the decor that's changed," James replied, as Evelyn joined them, carrying a coffee pot and 3 cups. Greg took a deep breath. "That's actually why I'm here. After I left, I did a lot of thinking. A lot of therapy, actually." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I realized my behavior wasn't just wrong. It was a symptom of deeper issues I needed to address." He reached into his bag and pulled out a folder. "I've been working with a diversity and inclusion nonprofit. We help businesses recognize and address discriminatory practices. I'm not here asking for forgiveness or my job back. The irony," he concluded, "is that losing everything helped me find myself." As they talked, the restaurant began coming alive for dinner service. Staff members moved with confident efficiency, calling out greetings to regular customers who were already starting to arrive. The dining room filled with a diverse mix of people: young professionals, families, couples of all backgrounds. Tony emerged from the kitchen, now wearing the title of executive chef proudly. He'd recently been featured in a local magazine for his innovative fusion menu. The article had praised not just his culinary skills, but the restaurant's transformation into a community cornerstone. "We host community dinners twice a month now," Evelyn explained to Greg. "Local organizations use our space for fundraisers. Last week, we had a culinary workshop for underprivileged youth. The waiting list for reservations is 2 months long," James added with a smile. "Turns out excellence and inclusivity aren't mutually exclusive." As the evening progressed, Greg witnessed the fruit of the changes he'd inadvertently sparked. The staff moved like a well-orchestrated symphony, their previous fear replaced by confidence and joy. Customers greeted each other like old friends, creating an atmosphere that was both sophisticated and warmly welcoming. Before leaving, Greg turned to the Carters one last time. "Thank you," he said simply, "not for forgiving me, but for showing me what this place could become." Later that night, after the last customer had left and the kitchen was clean, the Carters gathered their staff for their nightly debrief. These meetings had become a beloved tradition, where everyone shared stories and suggestions from the day. "You know," Tony said, leaning against the prep station, "when you first took over, I thought it was the end of La Maison Dorée. Instead, it was just the beginning." Emily chimed in, "Remember when we used to be afraid to speak up?" Now we can't get Miguel to stop sharing his ideas for new desserts. Everyone laughed as Miguel playfully threw a towel in her direction. James looked around the room at their extended family, for that's what they had become. Mr. Patterson saw something in us that day, he reflected. Not just in Evelyn and me, but in all of us. He saw the potential for change. To change, Evelyn raised her water glass in a toast. And to the future. As they left that night, the Carters paused to look at their restaurant. The elegant sign still glowed softly, but now it represented something more than fine dining. It stood as a beacon of transformation, a testament to the power of second chances and the strength of community. Their children, who often did homework in the office after school, had watched the transformation with pride. You know what's cool? Michael had said recently. When people ask where their parents work, I get to say mine owned the place that changed everything. The final act closes with the Carters walking hand in hand to their car, the stars twinkling above La Maison Dorée. What had begun as an evening of discrimination had blossomed into a story of redemption, growth, and community. The restaurant had become more than a business. It was a symbol of what was possible when people dared to imagine something better. And somewhere, Mr. Patterson was smiling, knowing his legacy was secure in the hands of those who understood that true excellence comes not from exclusion, but from embracing the rich diversity of human experience. La Maison Dorée had indeed become a golden house, not just in name, but in spirit.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel so we can keep bringing you the best stories.